Hey there, Hannah and Mike here with Delta Faucet. Today we're going to walk you through how to install a Delta Beverage Faucet. We will also walk you through the steps on connecting your beverage faucet to a cold water supply, a reverse osmosis system, or an under-counter filter. These steps will generally apply for any under-the-counter appliance that you're connecting your faucet to.
Today, we've chosen the contemporary model for our installation, but Delta offers a variety of different styles and finishes of beverage faucets. Now, this video will work for most Delta beverage faucets unless the model number begins with DWQ. If the model number of your Delta faucet begins with DWQ, be sure to check out the other installation video we have for that. First, let's take a look at your installation location. You'll need to make sure that you have a hole in your sink or countertop that will accommodate this beverage faucet. This hole needs to be 1¼ to 1½ inches in diameter.
Next, let's collect the tools we'll need to complete this installation. You'll need a drill, a 1/4 inch drill bit and a 3/8 inch drill bit, a screwdriver, a bucket, an adjustable wrench, and a towel for some light water cleanup, a tape measure, Pex cutters, a pencil. You may need some silicone sealant, and of course, some safety glasses. All right, let's grab those tools and supplies and let's get started. First, we're gonna mount the faucet to your sink or countertop. So included in your package is this gasket here. It has a paper backing on it. So we're gonna have the paper facing towards you or facing up towards the faucet. We're gonna slide it on our tubing here. Making sure we don't damage this tag here. It does have important information like your model number on it. So once I get close to the bottom of the faucet here, I'm gonna peel off this paper backing. All right, now I'm just gonna seat it right onto the bottom of my faucet. Okay, should look just like that. All right, now we're gonna pick up the faucet, gather this tubing, and we're gonna place it right into the hole. Again, making sure that this tag doesn't get damaged. Okay, now we are going to secure it underneath. So if you don't have 2 people for this step, I do recommend going underneath, tightening it till it's just snug, and then coming back up, centering it, making sure it's just where you want it, and then go back underneath and tighten it all the way. So I have Mike here to help me, so he's gonna secure it while I hold it, making sure that it stays centered and just where I want it while he secures it all the way down.
To secure our faucet into place, we're gonna be using the included mounting bracket. Now you notice the bracket itself has 2 sides, one that's curved and the other that's flat. We want to keep an eye on the flat side because this is the side that we want to make sure comes in contact with the bottom of our sink or countertop when we tighten everything into place. So to begin, I'm going to be taking my waistline here. This is the red tube, feeding my mounting bracket over the waistline. Again, making sure the orientation of the bracket has the flat side facing up, and then followed by my mounting nut. Again, placing the tube through the center of the nut. Now that I have both these in place, I'm going to push them up onto the shank of the faucet and begin tightening everything into place. Slide my mounting bracket up over the shank, making sure I keep the cutout facing the tubes and then the tubes aren't being pinched in any way. Then I'm gonna take my mounting nut, bring that up to the shank as well, get it started, hand threading it on here. All right, now that I have that snug, I'm gonna go back up top to check alignment one last time. Once I'm happy with it, I'm going to use the included wrench. Again, feeding the tube through the center of it. I find it's easy to grab these other hoses, just kind of hold them off to the side a little bit. Then with my other hand, tighten the wrench all the way down to hold my faucet securely to my sink or countertop. Okay, now that we've got that tightened all into place, I can remove the wrench, and I definitely recommend saving this in some place you remember where it is. So if you ever have to remove the faucet, you'll know right where to get that wrench from. Now that we have our beverage faucet secured to our countertop or our sink, we can move on to connecting the faucet directly to my cold water supply line. Now for this install, I'm going to be connecting the beverage faucet directly to my cold water stop. However, if you're installing the beverage faucet in tandem with a filtration system or a reverse osmosis system, you can go ahead and skip ahead in the video because we walk you through those installation steps a little bit later. Now, the next thing I want to point out is that I want to confirm that my cold water stop is in the off position and that my faucet is in the full mix position up on top of my countertop. That's halfway between hot and cold. What this will do will relieve any residual pressure that may be stored up in my supply lines before I move on to the next steps. Also, I want to point out that since I am connecting my beverage faucet directly to my cold water supply here and not using any sort of filtration system, I'm not going to be using my red waste line or my larger black drain line for this installation. Therefore, I've kind of coiled them up and taped them up out of the way behind the sink. Now, technically, if you had to, you could cut these lines if you need the space, but personally, I highly recommend just coiling them up. That way, it gives you the future option of adding a filtration system if you decide you want one. And also, it keeps that important little tag on the end of your drain line that shows you the manufacture date and the model number of your faucet if you need some additional help from customer service down the road. Now, the first thing we're going to be doing is installing this T-adapter to my cold water supply stop. Now, this T-adapter offers a spot not only for my faucet to connect, but also my beverage faucet coming off the side here. This T-adapter isn't included with your installation kit, but it's readily available at any local hardware store, so be sure to pick one up before moving on. Now, you'll also notice for my installation here, I have a touch faucet, so my cold water supply line for my faucet has an additional check valve on it. I'm going to walk through those installation steps, but if you don't have that check valve, that's totally fine. The installation steps will be extremely similar. All right, so the first step is disconnecting my cold water supply line from my faucet from my cold water supply stop. So I'm going to use an adjustable wrench here. And just gently disconnect my supply line. Again, I have that optional check valve, so I'm going to go ahead and disassemble that from my supply stop as well. Now, in this instance, I think it's easiest to go ahead and connect my T-adapter to my faucet supply before connecting it back to my supply stop. Now, again, I have this optional check valve here for my touch faucet. I'm just going to confirm that my little gasket is still seated in the bottom of my check valve, and then begin threading it gently onto the top of my T-adapter. Once I get it hand snug, I'm going to give it another half turn just to confirm that I get a nice watertight seal. And then once I have that in place, I can take my supply line from my faucet, attach it to the top of my check valve. Just like before, once it's hand snug, I'm going to use my little adjustable wrench. Give it another quarter or half turn or so just to ensure a watertight connection. I don't need to over tighten these, just enough so they're snug. Now that I have everything connected, I'm going to take my T-adapter and attach it to my cold water supply stop. One final time using my adjustable wrench. Make sure that's nice and snug. All right, now at this point, I'm going to use the supply line coming from my beverage faucet and take it into the side of my T-adapter and then secure it into place using that nut. Once I get it hand tight, using my adjustable wrench, just another quarter or half turn or so to ensure I've got a nice watertight connection. All right, now that we have all these connections made, that about wraps up everything here underneath the cabinet. The last step is turn on our supply stops, which will now allow water to start running both to our faucet and our beverage faucet, and it's a great time to check for leaks. So a few areas I want to point out is making sure I'm checking at the top of my supply stop, both sides of my T-adapter there, and also at the top of my check valve if I had to install it. Once everything looks great under here, we can move up top and flush our system. The last step of this install is going to be flushing our lines. And what this means is basically removing the aerator from the bottom of my beverage faucet and then running some water through it for about, say, 20 seconds to remove any debris that may have gotten caught in there during the installation process. To do this, I'm going to be using the aerator wrench that comes included with your faucet to remove the aerator from the bottom of the beverage faucet. Now on the aerator wrench, you'll notice it has these little teeth at the top that correspond with the teeth on the bottom of the aerator itself. I'm going to bring it up to the bottom of my beverage faucet spout here. Make sure those teeth grab the aerator and then gently unscrew it. Once you loosen it up, you can take the rest off by hand. Then carefully set it off to the side. Now at this point, I'm going to turn the faucet on and run water through it for about 20 seconds to clear any debris. All right, now to reinstall the aerator, we're just going to do the same steps in reverse. I find it's always easiest to preload the aerator on top of my wrench, making sure I get the teeth fitting together. Carefully bring both of them up underneath my faucet and then begin tightening it into place. Make sure it's snug in the bottom of the faucet. And that about wraps things up. My last little piece of advice is making sure that we take our aerator wrench, using the little clip on the side to clip it to our supply lines underneath the sink. That way, if you ever need it in the future, you know exactly where to find it. Now for this application, I'm going to run you through the installation steps of connecting your beverage faucet to the Delta Clarifi reverse osmosis system. Now if you're not connecting your faucet to the reverse osmosis system and you're connecting it to a different filter system, that's totally fine. I do run you through those installation steps a little bit later in the video, so be sure to skip ahead and check it out. So the first thing we're going to be doing is installing the included T adapter that comes with your system. Before I do this, I want to make sure that both of my supply stops are in the off position, both my hot and my cold side. Also, I'm making sure that my faucet is in the on and full mix position. This is halfway between hot and cold. And what this does is help remove any residual pressure that may be stored up within the supply lines before I start disconnecting them. Also, I've grabbed my adjustable wrench, a towel for a little bit of light water cleanup if I need it, and once everything looks ready, we can move underneath the sink to start disconnecting our supply lines and install our T adapter. Next, let's take a moment to check out our T adapter here that comes included with your system. On the side of the adapter itself, you'll see it has a little indicator arrow that indicates the flow of water through the adapter. So we want to make sure that the bottom here is the side we're connecting to our cold water supply stop here under the sink. Also on the supply stop itself, you'll see the supply line coming down from your faucet and connecting to the supply stop. Now here in my installation, I have a Delta Touch faucet installed, which means I have this additional little check valve. That's totally fine if yours at home looks a little bit different. The installation steps are going to be exactly the same. So to begin, I'm going to take my adjustable wrench and disconnect my supply lines and my check valve if I have it from my cold water supply stop. Now that we have everything disconnected, we can move on to installing our T adapter to our cold water supply stop. Now a little bit of a pro tip here is if you do have that Delta Touch faucet with the additional check valves, I find it's easier to go ahead and install the check valves to the top of my T adapter now before installing the T adapter to the cold water supply stop. Makes things just a little bit easier. Now if you don't have those additional check valves, that's totally fine. Just skip forward a couple seconds to the spot where we start installing the T adapter directly to the supply stop. So for those check valves, I want to make sure I have this little additional piece that I sit into the top of my T adapter, and then I bring down the check valve over the top of the T adapter and gently hand thread it onto the top of the T adapter, making sure I'm not cross threading or anything feels like it's binding. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and hand tighten that up. And then to ensure a nice watertight connection, I'm going to use my adjustable wrench and rotate this check valve one more full turn. My adjustable wrench, and then just rotate it one more revolution or until I feel it get nice and snug. Now it's important here, I don't want to over tighten this connection, I just need it snug enough to ensure that it's nice and watertight. All right, now that I have my T adapter ready to go, I can move on to installing it onto my supply stop. So I'm going to take my T adapter, bring it over to my supply stop, and then gently hand thread the nut down onto the stop itself. I'm going to do this until it gets a little bit snug. And then again, I'm going to use my adjustable wrench, except this time I'm going to do a quarter turn to ensure a nice watertight connection. All right, that's looking great. Now at this point, I want to point out that you'll notice I'm not using any sort of thread tape or additional sealant to help make these connections watertight. Everything's made from within the connections themselves. So this time, I'm going to take my faucet supply line and connect it to the top of my T-stop. Gently begin tightening the nut onto the top of the adapter or the check valve. Once that feels nice and snug, I'm going to use my adjustable wrench and again give it one more full turn or until I feel like it snug. All right, all of our connections are made and things are looking great under here. Now at this point, there's one final point that I really want to stress, and that's making sure that our T adapter is in the off position. So to confirm this, I just want to check my T adapter valve handle, making sure it's perpendicular to the flow of water coming out the side of the T adapter. Once that's in the off position, I can turn on my hot and my cold supply stops and then check for leaks at all those connection points that we just made. Once everything's looking good, we can move on to the next step of the installation. Moving right along, we can next install our saddle drain. Now the way the saddle drain works is it basically comes in two pieces and is going to clamp around your existing drain line under the sink, which will allow the wastewater from the system to flow through the saddle drain and then down into your existing drain line. Now there's a few important things to note about the saddle drain itself. The saddle drain that comes included with your system can only be installed on a 1.5-inch drain line. So if your drain line underneath the sink here is a little bit different size, you will need to go to the hardware store to buy an adapter that works for your configuration. Next, we want to make sure that the saddle drain is installed before the P-trap on a smooth and straight surface. Also, you can install the saddle drain either on a vertical pipe or on a horizontal pipe. Now, I do want to point out that if you install on a horizontal pipe, we want to make sure that the hole for the saddle drain comes directly from the top of the drain line. That'll allow that wastewater to flow directly down into your main drain line and out. So, next thing I want to do is use the half of my saddle drain where my drain connection is going to be made and test fit a location. Now, in my application here, I've got a nice spot, again, before the P-trap, smooth and straight, right on the side here. Once I'm happy with the location, I'm going to use a pencil to mark where I need to drill that hole. Now, one thing I want to point out here is I also want to consider where that drain line is going to be coming from. For my application, my system's going to be sitting on the right side of my cabinet, so I'm going to have my drain line generally facing in that direction. However, I also want to make sure that I'm going to have enough room to make any of those connections in later steps, so just make sure you're giving yourself enough clearance to make those connections with wherever you locate that saddle drain. Once you're happy with the location, you can hold it in place with one hand. I've got a pencil here, I'm just going to use that to mark the location of that hole that I need to drill. And now, I know exactly where I want to drill that hole for the saddle drain. Now the hole we're going to be drilling is 3/8 of an inch. And another little pro tip here is I think it's easier to go ahead and drill a smaller pilot hole first, say like 1/8 of an inch, which will help make sure that 3/8 of an inch drill bit stays exactly centered as we drill into the curved surface of the drain. And also we want to be very careful to make sure we're only drilling through the one side of the drain and not all the way through the other side as well. So once everything looks good, let's go ahead and drill that hole for the saddle drain and then we'll move on to the next step. With our hole drilled, now we can install our saddle drain. So the first step is using this included little gasket. You'll see one side has the adhesive backing on it, so I'm gonna go ahead and peel off that protective backing to expose the adhesive. And then this is gonna be placed on the inside of the saddle drain, line up those two holes exactly. So again, the adhesive side towards the saddle drain, perfectly center it over that hole, press it down into place like so. Next, we're gonna place that saddle drain over the hole that we drilled like this and clamp it in place with the two sides of the saddle drain and then the included nuts and bolts. I think it's easiest to go ahead and preload one of the nuts into the back of the saddle drain. You can see it's got a little indent that the nut fits in to hold it into place. I'm going to hold that in place with my finger. And then with the other side, the saddle drain with that gasket we just applied, use one of the bolts to begin threading that into place by hand. At this point, I'm just going to use my fingers or a screwdriver to kind of get it not tight or snug yet, but just enough that it's going to kind of stay in place. Okay, we're getting pretty close on that side. You can see I still have a little bit of freedom movement here. At this point, a little bit of a pro tip is to use either your pencil or your screwdriver. Carefully place it through the side of the saddle drain until you feel it go into the hole that we drilled previously. That way I can confirm that I'm correctly aligned with the saddle drain and the hole on the side of the main drain. Once I'm happy with that location, I'm gonna hold that in place and then snug it all the way up by continuing to tighten those bolts on each side. And at this point, I don't need to over tighten this, I just need enough to make sure it's snug and make a nice watertight connection between the saddle drain and the main drain line itself. Okay, you can see with a little bit of force, it's not moving at all. So now I'm confident that I've made a nice connection between my drain with my saddle drain.
All right, I've gone ahead and dry fit my housing unit into place in my cabinet. And I've specifically placed it here, right underneath my beverage faucet, where I know that the hoses will reach my unit, my pre-filter, and my Re-Mineralizer if you're choosing to use one. You just want to make sure there isn't large distances between these so that the hoses reach everything. All right, so now we're going to dry fit our pre-filter and our Re-Mineralizer into place. So I know that I'm gonna place my Re-Mineralizer to the left of my unit, right about here. And that leaves room for my pre-filter, which is right here, to go right to the side of our Re-Mineralizer. So it comes with C-clips right here, and it says this side up. We're gonna clip this on, just like that. Now, before you drill into your cabinet, you wanna think about what's behind the walls. So you wanna make sure you're not gonna drill into any plumbing or electrical. And if you're drilling into a sidewall, you wanna make sure you're not gonna drill into an appliance like a dishwasher or into the cabinet next to it. Okay, so I can take my pencil now, and I'm gonna make a reference mark right on the side of my C-clip, right on the back of my cabinet wall. Okay, now that I have that marked, I'm gonna pull off my C-clip. You can just slide it down. Okay, now I'm gonna take my pencil again, and I'm gonna make a mark for my pilot hole right in the center here. Now that we've got that marked, we can go ahead and drill our pilot hole. All right, I've got my pilot hole drilled, and I knew that I was gonna hit a stud, so I used an 1/8" drill bit. If you know you have a hollow wall, you'll need to use a 1/4" drill bit and the included anchor. All right, so now we can go ahead and mount our clip. So we're gonna take the included screw, we're gonna preload it in. I'm just gonna go ahead and get it started. Okay, now that I have that started, I'm gonna take my drill with a Phillips bit and I'm gonna screw it the rest of the way in. Okay, make sure that's straight and snug. Okay, now I'm gonna hold off on mounting my pre-filter, move on to my next step, which is mounting our Re-Mineralizer. So this one has 2 clips. So you're gonna place the clips on right above this top ridge. Again, they just snap on like that. I'm gonna take our second clip, and this one goes right below this last bottom ridge. Okay, now this mounts the same, it just has 2 clips. The only thing to note on this one is that it does have tubes that come out of the top and the bottom. So you just wanna make sure to leave enough clearance that the tubes have enough room on the top and the bottom.
Now that we have our brackets in place, we can move on to making the connections between our water supply, our system, and our beverage faucet. Now the first thing I've done is go ahead and move my system out of my cabinet if it was still in there just outside, which will allow me the most clearance to make all these connections. Next, we're gonna move on to connecting our pre-filter, which is gonna be connected to our T-adapter. To do this, I'm gonna be using 2 of the hoses that came included with your installation system, the 2 white ones that are 3/8 of an inch in diameter. Now you'll notice the hoses, there's 2 lanes here. One's a little bit longer, which is 39 inches, and there's a shorter one at 20 inches. So I'm gonna start using the longer hose that's 39 inches, picking either end and using the nut that came from my T-adapter and threading it over the end of the hose, making sure that the threads are facing down. Once I've got it on there, I'm gonna take that same end and place it over the end of my T-adapter. Now the important thing here is making sure this hose seats fully against the threads of the T-adapter itself. Once I've got that pushed in as far as I can take my nut and begin threading it over the end of the T-adapter. Once that's hand tight, I'm going to use my adjustable wrench to give it just another 1/4 or 1/2 turn to ensure that it's nice and snug. Now that we have that first connection made, we can take a second to go ahead and flush our line. Now what that means is basically running some water through that T-adapter and that hose that we just connected to help clear any debris that may have gotten trapped in there during installation. That could lead to a flow issue down the road, so it takes just a second to help ensure that everything's going to function correctly. So to do this, I'm going to grab a bucket. With one hand, direct the end of that hose that's connected to the T-adapter into the bucket, and then turn on my cold water stop and also my T adapter to allow water to start flowing through my hose. Again, I can let it run for say 5 to 10 seconds, then turn everything off, and that will complete flushing our lines. All right, now that we have those lines flushed, we can move on to installing our pre-filter. Now I want to take just a moment to talk about the pre-filter itself. You'll notice on the front of the pre-filter there's a big arrow labeled flow, and this indicates the direction that the flow of water needs to travel through the filter itself. So through the bottom is where the water supply needs to come, and then from the top we're going to connect the output of the filter to the input on our system. So I'm going to start by pulling off the rubber plug from the bottom of the filter itself. This is a push to connect fitting. I'm going to take the end of my hose and push it up into the bottom of the filter until it's seated fully in the filter itself. You'll notice the hose comes pre-marked 5/8 of an inch from the end of the hose, and we need to keep an eye on that mark because that will help us know that it's fully seated within the filter. So once you're ready, I'm going to line up the two. With a little bit of pressure, we're going to push the hose all the way into the filter itself. Once it's seated fully, I like to give it just a little bit of a tug down to ensure that it's grabbing correctly, and then I'm going to use this blue locking clip to push it onto the side between the push connect fitting and the filter body to ensure that it's not going to come disconnected. Once I've got that side connected, I can now use my shorter hose. Same thing, pull off the rubber plug. Using the shorter hose, again keeping an eye on that reference mark, a little bit of pressure to push them together. Pull up just to ensure a nice connection. And then use my second blue locking clip to help lock everything into place. Now I've got this connected, I can begin making my connection from my pre-filter to my system. Now to make the connection to the back of the system, we first need to remove the associated plug that we're going to be inserting our pre-filter into. Now the input we're going to be using is the one labeled in on the back of the system. So I'm going to hold down the outer ring of the push to connect fitting and then pull up on the plug to remove it. Next, I'm going to take that hose that's coming from my pre-filter, line it up with that input labeled in. Again, just like before with the other push to connect fittings, keeping an eye on that reference line, and then push it straight down until it fully seats within the fitting. After that, I like to give it a little bit of a tug up to ensure a nice fit, and then use one of my locking clips to make sure I lock that connection in place. All right, now that we have that first connection made, we can move on to connecting our waste line. So first I'm going to remove the plug. You'll see it's the output on the back of the system labeled waste. I'm going to hold down the red ring of the push to connect fitting, pull up on the plug, and set that off to the side. Now the connection I'm going to be using is this red push to connect fitting to the red tube. This is the waste tube that goes to my beverage faucet. Just like before, I'm going to hold it directly over my connection and then push it straight in until I feel it fully seat within the fitting. Give it a little bit of a pull up to ensure it's grabbing. And I'm going to use one of the smaller blue locking clips to lock that connection into place. All right, now that we have that waste line installed, we can move on to installing the drain line that runs from the beverage faucet to that saddle drain location that we installed in the previous step. Now, there's a few things to remember about this drain line. First is that it's gravity fed. So when we run it from our faucet to our saddle drain, we want to make sure there's no low spots, no kinks, or any loops that could catch water as it drains. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab this drain line and just kind of dry fit it to the location of the saddle drain. And what I'm doing is I'm doing a visual inspection to kind of make sure that I'm not seeing any locations of loops or dips or kinks or anything that could kind of catch water as that beverage faucet drains into our main drain. Once I'm happy with the location, I'm gonna kind of mark a spot on my drain line, and this is where I need to cut. Now when I make this cut, it's really important that I use a tool that's correct for the job, a Pex Cutter, because I need this cut to be straight and clean. So once you're ready, grab your Pex Cutter and cut the tube at that location that you were marking with your dry fit phase. Once that's done, you can take your drain line over to our saddle drain, and just like other push to connect fittings, line it up straight and push it all the way in until it fully seats about 5/8 of an inch. Once you're happy with it, give it a little pull to confirm that it's grabbing, and then use a locking clip to hold everything in place. All right, we've got that drain line connected and things are looking great. So now we can move on to making the connection between the unit and the faucet itself. Now for my installation, I'm going to be installing the optional Re-Mineralizer cartridge that sits between the unit and the faucet. However, if you're not installing this, that's totally fine. The installation steps are going to be extremely similar. So the first thing you want to do is take a look at the supply tube that runs to our faucet. Now, just like we did with the drain line, I'm going to need to cut off the nut that comes installed on the end of the tube. Again, it's very important to use the correct tool for the job because we need that cut to be not only straight, but also clean. And I think it's a good idea to try to cut it down towards the end here to make sure you leave as much length as possible in the tube itself. All right, now, since I'm installing the optional Re-Mineralizer cartridge, I'm gonna go ahead and connect this tube to my first elbow and then to the cartridge. However, if you weren't using that cartridge, you would go ahead and take the end of this tube, connecting it directly to the system. That's the pure output on the back of the system itself. So for the Re-Mineralizer cartridge, I'm gonna take this elbow, doesn't matter which one I use, push it all the way in until I feel it fully seat, pull it back a little bit to ensure a nice connection, and then use one of my little blue locking clips to lock it into place. Next, I'm gonna take my Re-Mineralizer cartridge, and I wanna point out on the Re-Mineralizer cartridge, just like the pre-filter, it is directional. So if you look at the bottom here, you'll see it has a little arrow that shows you which side is the inlet coming from the filter and which side is the output that should lead to the faucet. So in this instance, my output to the faucet is coming off the bottom here. So I'm gonna remove this rubber plug and then take the elbow that leads to the faucet and push it all the way down. Give it a little bit of a tug up to ensure that it's seated fully and has a good connection. And that looks great. Next, I'm going to take the top plug off my cartridge. That's the side that's labeled inlet, heading to the filter. Take my other elbow, push it down onto the top until it seats fully. Give it a little bit of a tug up to ensure I've got a good connection. Then I'm gonna take my remaining white tube, the one that's a 1/4 inch in diameter. I'm gonna push it into my remaining elbow, again, keeping an eye on that reference line, making sure it's seated fully into the elbow. And then again with a locking clip to lock that connection into place. Once I've got that done, I can take the other end of my tube, come over to my system, remove the remaining plug. That's the one on the output labeled pure. Then take my tube that leads to my Re-Mineralizer or to my faucet, if that's your installation. Line it up, push it all the way in until it seats fully. A little bit of a tug up. And then using my last locking clip to lock that connection into place. Now that we have all of our connections made, we can move on to letting the system run through its initial startup procedure. So I think it's a great idea to let the unit run through this procedure when it's outside of the cabinet because it makes it that much easier to check for leaks at all those connection points that we just made. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that the filter cartridges in the unit are in the full locked position. That means these handles on the front are fully horizontal, left to right. Next, I also want to verify that my beverage faucet up on top of my sink or countertop is in the off position. Once that's done, I'm going to start supplying water to the unit by ensuring that my cold water supply stop is in the on position and then turning on my T adapter as well. Now that I have water running to the unit, I'm going to go ahead and plug the unit in. Now when I do, the unit will start humming and you'll see some status lights pop up on the front. This procedure will take about 5 minutes and is totally normal, but again, I think it's a great idea to let it do this outside of the cabinet, and this is a great chance for me to check all of my connections to make sure I don't see any evidence of leaks that may need to be corrected. Once that's done, we'll come back here and start getting everything tucked neatly back inside of our cabinet. All right, the unit has completed its initial startup procedure and everything's looking great. I don't see any evidence of leaks that needs to be corrected, so that about wraps up everything underneath the sink here. The last thing we need to do is carefully move the unit back inside the cabinet and make sure everything stays nice and tidy. We want to make sure that the pre-filter and the Re-Mineralizer get in their respective brackets, that as we move everything back in place, that none of the hoses get kinked or crimped in any way that could cause a flow issue, and also pay close attention to our unit itself, making sure it's not coming in contact with the side or the back wall, which may lead to a little bit of extra vibration. All right, with all that said, let's carefully move everything back underneath the sink. That'll wrap up everything here, and we can move back up top for some final installation steps. The final step of this installation is flushing our system to ensure everything's going to work properly. To do this, I'm going to turn on the water at the beverage faucet and let it run for 30 minutes. Now keep in mind, while this water is running, it is completely potable, so you can capture it and use it as you would use any other water source in your home. Also, I think it's a great idea to go ahead and periodically check underneath while it's running to ensure I don't see any evidence of leaks that I might need to correct. Once everything looks good and the 30 minutes are up, I'm gonna turn off my water, and that wraps things up. You should be good to go.
Now it's time to hook up our beverage faucet to our filtration system. So I've gone ahead and turned off our cold water supply, and I've installed our filtration system according to the manufacturer's instructions. I've also gone ahead and coiled up our drain line and our waistline here. Those are the red and black tubes. You can cut them if you want to. You're not going to need them for this installation, but I recommend just coiling them up. There is a tag on here with some important information, so just get them out of the way. All right. So now we can hook up our faucet supply line to our filtration system. Now this particular system, I don't need this fitting that's on the end of the supply line here, and I will need to cut it off. So it's really important that you use the right tool to cut it. So I have some Pex Cutters here. When you make the cut, you want to make sure that it's a straight, clean cut so you get a good connection from your faucet to your filtration system. All right, let's get to it. Now that we've got that cut, I'm gonna go ahead and close up my Pex Cutters here. All right, now it's time to connect it to our filtration system. So you can see my curve here is a little bit tight, but as long as you're not any tighter than 4 inches in diameter, you're fine. If you are tighter than that, you'll need to add some tubing or get a longer tube. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and push this in. So once you've got that in, you do wanna give it a quick tug just to make sure that it's seated. Now we're gonna turn on our cold water supply, check for any leaks. If all looks good, we're gonna go up top, turn on our faucet, and flush the system according to the manufacturer's instructions. In order for our system to work properly, we do need to flush it. So to do that, we need to remove our aerator. We're gonna grab the aerator wrench included in your package, and we're gonna line up the teeth on the wrench with the grooves on the bottom of our aerator, and then we'll start to remove it. All right, now that we have that out, we're gonna turn on our faucet and let that run for about 5 minutes or however long the manufacturer of the filter system says to. Now, while that's running, I think it's a good idea to go underneath the sink and double check that there aren't any leaks that need to be corrected. After this runs for 5 minutes, we can turn it off, reinstall the aerator, and when you do that, you wanna make sure that you don't over tighten it, just make sure that it's snug. All right, I hope that process went smooth for you.
And remember, if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.